All right, today we're going to look at lesson 1.4, solving absolute value equations. All right, you guys have already told me that the absolute value of any number is positive, and you've already told me that the absolute value symbols are those two very straight lines. Okay, so here's what happens when you get your quiz on Monday and you're looking at a bunch of equations on a piece of paper. I want the absolute value equations to jump out at you because they have absolute value bars in them, and they work completely different than the equations we've been solving already this week. So the essential question: how can you solve an absolute value equation? You are going to be responsible to write two new equations. So I want you to highlight equation 1 and equation 2. Not the words behind it, but I need equation 1 and 2 to jump out at you when you're studying, because if you don't write both equations, then your answer will never be correct. All right? Now, the other thing I want you to highlight on this screen is where it says always check for extraneous solutions. Up to this point, checking has been optional. I've told you all week, remember, you can check if you want. It's no longer an option when it comes to an absolute value equation, because some of these answers you're going to get do not actually work in the problem. So you have to check your answers. You're like, Ms. Johnson, how are you going to know if I check? Because there's problems where one of the two answers you find actually have to be crossed out. So if you don't check, then there's going to come a point where you lose points because you haven't actually marked out a wrong answer. All right? So you've got to check. Now, I don't care if you check in your head, if you want to check on paper, but with absolute value equations, you definitely need to check all of your answers. All right? Now, example number 1, it says solve the equation. So the first thing we should notice about letter A is there's an absolute value symbol in the problem. Okay? So for equation number 1, we're supposed to drop the bars and write what we see. So everybody drop the bar and write what you see. What do you see when you drop the bars? X equals 10. Absolutely. Now, for the second equation, so you don't move on because we have a second equation, we have to drop the bar and change the sign of the answer. Well, what's the answer in this problem? The absolute value of x is equal to what?
25.
No, we're in A still. 10. See, that's what you don't want to do. Don't leave A until you've written both equations. So the absolute value of x equals, what's the answer? 10. So we have to change the sign of the answer in the second equation. So what's my second equation going to be? X equals negative 10. We drop the bars and we change the sign. Now, let's see if this is true. The absolute value of 10 is equal to what? Class, anybody? The absolute value of 10 equals 10. The absolute value of negative 10 equals 10. All right, let's say, Ms. Johnson, I'm still not sure. Okay, I know some of you are new this year, so maybe absolute value is not something you really learned last year. So let me give you a visual. All right, Jace, I want you to stand in the front of the room, and I want you to just hold up a 0. You're the middle of my number line. Okay, you're a 0. All right, Milani, I want you to stand on the right side of him, and I want you to hold up the number 5. Okay, you're the number 5 on a number line. All right, and then Connor, I want you to come stand right here on the corner of my carpet, and I want you to hold up a negative 5. Okay, very quickly.
Okay.
All right. So here's the thing you have to understand. The absolute value of a number is its distance from 0 on a number line. So look at Milani over there. She's number 5. How many spaces away from 0 is she? 5. Okay. Connor is negative 5. But how many spaces away from 0 is he?
5.
So he's the same number of spaces away as Milani is. So it doesn't matter what the sign is. It's the distance from 0 on a number line. All right, you guys can sit down. So that's why both 10 and negative 10 have an absolute value of positive 10. All right, now, write down letter B. You do letter B on your own. What do you think the two equations are going to be? You have the absolute value of x equals 25. Joanna, what do you think the first equation is going to be? There you go. Drop the bars and write what you see. So x equals 25. Bailey, what do you think the second one's going to be? Good. We drop the bars and we change the sign of the answer. So x equals negative 25. Again, if we plug those in based on what we just learned, the absolute value of both 25 and negative 25 is equal to positive 25. All right, now look at this next sentence that I've written. This is one you want to highlight because, again, people never know how to study for math, so I'm telling you, when you sit down to review what you learned in 1.4, go to these highlighted pieces, okay? Commit these things to memory because it's going to save you a whole lot of time because look at this statement. Absolute values equal to a negative number have no solution. So instead of wasting your time trying to write two equations and solve equations, look at the problem before you start, okay? The absolute value of x equals negative 6. Is there any number in this world that I could put in place of x and it come out to be a negative 6? Think about it. Is the absolute value of any number in the world ever going to come out to be a negative 6? No. So this problem is no solution. There's absolutely nothing for you to do but to write no solution. So I want you to write no solution and then I want you to highlight that problem. Because I want that problem, when you're studying, I want you to train yourself to look for that situation on a quiz or a test and not waste your time trying to work it out. Now that leads us into what looks a little bit more complicated, right? Because now in the parentheses, in the absolute value bars, we have more than just a variable. So take a minute with your partner or with your group, and I want you to write the two equations for letter D. All right, Kendall, what was the first equation that you and Jace wrote for letter D? X minus 1 equals 4. Perfect. You drop the bars and you write what you see. Okay? But what's the second equation that you wrote? Elizabeth?
X minus 1 equals negative 4.
X minus 1 equals negative 4. Remember, you must write two equations. It's not about getting two answers. Okay? You first have to write two equations and then you solve those two equations. Now, the left side of these are the same. So how are we going to solve for x in both of these problems? We're going to add 1. So you can almost work these at the same time. Okay? But we're adding 1 to both sides of both equations. So x equals 5 and x equals negative 3. All right. So see, girls, you can't solve one equation and then give the opposite answer. Okay. It's two separate equations that have to be written. All right. Now we got to check them. So let's check them. 5. Now, always check in the original problem. Okay. A couple hours ago, I had somebody trying to check in the equation they had written. You don't want to do that. Take your answers back to the original problem. So in the absolute value bars, we plug 5 in. What's 5 minus 1? Everybody, what's 5 minus 1?
4.
What's the absolute value of 4? Does 4 equal 4? Then we keep the answer. Negative 3. What's negative 3 minus 1? Negative 4. What's the absolute value of negative 4? Does 4 equal 4? Yes. All right. Now, I want you to do letter E by yourself. And if you're brave enough, go do letter F as well. Okay? Take a minute, do letter E. And if you're super brave, do letter F. Chelsea, what was the first equation that you wrote?
2x plus 12 equals 4.
Perfect. You drop the bars and write what you see. Okay, Ashton, what's the second equation you wrote?
2x plus 12 equals negative 4x.
Perfect. 2x plus 12, you drop the bars and you simply change the sign of the answer. So negative 4x. Now, don't call me after midnight. That tells us we have to do what in this problem? What do we have to do first? Move the variable. So are we going to move 2x or are we going to move 4x? 2x, okay? Remember, we learned yesterday, by moving 4x in this problem or negative 4x, we would clear the right side of the problem and we don't want to do that. So we are going to subtract 2x from both sides of both equations. Now again, you have every right. You can work this one equation at a time, okay? I'm just trying to go a little bit quicker. But 4x minus 2x is 2x. And 12 equals negative 6x. How do I solve the first equation? Divide both sides by 2, so x equals 6. And over here, for the second equation, divide both sides by 6, so x equals -2. Now, let's check them. How many of you checked your answers? How many of you hadn't even answered them yet? Okay, let's plug in the 6. What's 2? What am I doing to 2 and 6 when I plug it in? Multiply. Okay, that's 2x, which is 2 times x. So what's 2 times 6?
12.
What's 12 plus 12?
24.
What's the absolute value of 24? 24. Okay, I should have more voices than I hear. All right, the other side I plug in 6, and what's 4 times 6?
24.
Does 24 equal 24?
Yes.
Perfect. Go plug in a -2. What's 2 times -2? What's -4 plus 12?
8.
What's the absolute value of 8?
8.
On the other side, what's 4 times -2? Does 8 equal -8? Then does x equal -2 work as one of my answers? You would not know that if you did not check it. So we're going to cross it out. Do not erase it, okay, because it's there. What you're showing me by crossing it out is that's an extraneous solution. I'm not going to make you write out those words. As long as you cross it out, you're letting me know I solved, I got this, but that one doesn't work. So just simply put an X over it. All right, what are the equations for letter F? Anybody got the equations for letter F? Okay, Noah.
You want me to say it out loud?
Yeah.
So negative plus 3 plus x equals -3.
All right, does anybody want to stop him? All right, Logan, why do you want to stop him?
Because it's -3.
The absolute value is equal to -3. What did we learn? If an absolute value is set equal to a negative number, what's our answer? No solution. So if you started to work letter F, I want you to erase whatever you put and replace it with no solution. And then I want you to highlight question F. Again, when you sit down to study, I want you to train your brain to look for this situation, because you're going to waste so much time on a quiz or test trying to work out a problem when you don't need to. Okay? So no solution. Now, we go to the next set of problems, and it looks even more complicated. So here's what you have to know. You must isolate the absolute value portion first. Okay? You cannot write your equations until the absolute value portion of the problem is isolated. So, looking at letter G, what is the absolute value part of this problem? Good. The absolute value of x minus 2. So, if I circle that, I want you to circle it. You can highlight it. Do something to make it stand out, because I have to isolate this before I can do anything else. Okay? I cannot tell you how many people on their test last year just wrote x minus 2 plus 5 equals 9. Your answer is going to be wrong every single time. You have to isolate the absolute value portion first. So, what do we have to move so that it will be by itself? The 5. How do we move it? We subtract it from both sides of the equal sign. So, we get the absolute value of x minus 2 is equal to 4. Now we can write our two equations. Okay, now we can write the two equations. Javon, what will our two equations be? Javon, you need to take your hoodie off your head, please. Okay? Go ahead, tell me what they would be. X minus 2 equals 4, and what's the second one? There you go. X minus 2 equals 4, and x minus 2 equals -4. Javon, finish these problems for me. How do I solve for x? You add 2 to both sides of both equations. So x equals 6, and x equals -2. Now, again, we've got to check. So let's try to do this quickly. Plug 6 in. What's 6 minus 2? 4. What's the absolute value of 4? What's 4 plus 5? 9 equals 9. All right? -2 minus 2. Nope.
Negative
4. What's the absolute value of negative 4? What's 4? The absolute value of 4 is 4 plus 5 equals 9. Awesome. Both of them worked. All right. Now, letter H. Letter H could possibly be the most complicated one that I teach you today. Because you have to remember right here. Remember when there's a number and a parenthesis and nothing between them? What operation is that? So what do you think it means when you have a negative 2 and an absolute value bar with nothing between them? It's what? Right, so it's what operation? No. It's multiplication, all right? Let me teach you about the absolute value bar and a number outside of it, okay? You have to think of that absolute value bar as a wall that you cannot get through, okay? A parenthesis is kind of weak, so we can distribute over it. We can get over it, okay? The absolute value bar is a wall that we cannot go through. So we're never going to distribute when there's an absolute value bar. What we are going to do, though, is we are going to have to isolate the 5x minus 1, okay? We have to get the absolute value part of this problem alone. So my question is, which of those two numbers do we move first? Okay? We cannot combine them because nobody's told me yet. If there's a number and an absolute value bar with nothing in between them, what operation is that? Multiplication. So I can't combine a negative 2 and a negative 3. They're two different operations are being done. So the question is, which one of those do I move first? The negative 2 or the negative 3? How do I move the 3? I add it to both sides. Perfect. I add it to both sides. So I have negative 2 times the absolute value of 5x minus 1, and it equals negative 8. Now I still can't write my equations because the absolute value part is still not alone. How do I move the negative 2 to the other side? You divide. They're multiplying it, so you have to divide both sides by negative 2. So the absolute value of 5x minus 1 equals what? Anybody? Negative 8 divided by negative 2 equals 4. Now can we write our two equations? Now, here's my question. Why did nobody try to stop me at the beginning when the problem was set equal to negative 11?
I don't know.
Okay? Hold on. If you had, I would have told you were incorrect. Okay? We cannot make the call about no solution until the absolute value portion is alone. Okay? So if you had tried to tell me at the beginning, stop, this is no solution, I would have said, not yet. Okay? You cannot make the call about a no solution answer until the absolute value portion is isolated. So you can see we've isolated it and we actually can work this problem. So what are the two equations? Anybody give them to me. I don't care who. 5x minus 1 equals 4 and 5x minus 1 equals negative 4. Okay? How do we solve this? What do we move first? You add 1 to both sides of both equations. So 5x equals 5 and 5x equals negative 3. Divide both sides by and x equals remember, we're going to leave it as a fraction. It is a reduced fraction, so we're leaving it as a fraction. Okay? Now, let's go plug this in. Be very careful. Plug the 1 in. What's 5 times 1? 5 minus 1?
4.
The absolute value of 4. Now, what are we doing with that 4? You've got a negative 2 outside that had nothing between it, so what are you supposed to do with 4 and negative 2? What's 4 times negative 2? And negative 8 minus 3 is negative 11. All right, now, this is a fraction. You're like, Ms. Johnson, do I have to check it? Yes, we have to check it, all right? But keep in mind, negative 2 times the absolute value of 5 times negative 3/5. This 5 is over a 1. So what will simplify before you multiply? The 5s will simplify, so what does that leave you with in there? It leaves you with a negative 3. So negative 2 times the absolute value of negative 3 minus 1. Sorry, I made that a parenthesis. My bad. All right, what is negative 3 minus 1? All right, negative 4. What's the absolute value of negative 4? We're down here. Positive 4. 4 times negative 2 is what? And negative 8 minus 3 is? Perfect. So it works. It was a fraction, but it works. All right, lastly, I got to get to this last one and then I'll take questions. All right, I changed the sentence that was in your notes. So I need you to cross out what I have in your notes, and I need you to change it to what's on the screen, and I need you to highlight it, okay? I'm trying to make it a little easier. I think the sentence that was in the notes is a little bit more confusing. So be sure to change the sign of both terms in the answer. Remember, the first equation is simple. We drop the bars and we write what we see. So 2 plus x equals 2x plus 1. There is nothing tricky about that, okay? But what happens when the answer has two parts to it? Okay? Which side of the equation are we going to use as the answer? Which side of the equation has been the answer the whole lesson? On the right side, okay? So here's what you're naturally probably going to do. You're naturally going to go 2 plus x equals negative 2x plus 1. The problem with that is you only change the sign of the 2x. You have to change both signs. So instead of a positive 1, you should have changed it to a negative 1. Okay? So you need to make sure that you understand. And look, I would highlight this as well. Okay? After you highlight the statement, highlight the negative signs. Show yourself what the statement looks like in the problem. You have to change both terms in the answer. If you don't, your answer is not going to come out to be correct. So we subtract 2x from both sides in this first one. We get 2 minus 1x equals 1. We subtract 2 from both sides. We get negative 1x equals negative 1. We divide both sides by negative 1. And what does x equal? Chirp, chirp. What's negative 1 over negative 1? 1. Anything over itself is 1. In the second equation, we're going to add 2x to both sides. We're going to get 2 plus 3x equals negative 1. We're going to subtract 2 from both sides. We're going to get 3x equals negative 3. We're going to divide both sides by 3. And what does this x equal? Negative 1. And just a spoiler alert, both of these work. So both of these, when you plug them back into the problem, would give you a correct answer. And that is lesson 1.4.